Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the sustainability session. We're going to be putting words into action, and everyone's going to be fueled with all sorts of positive vibes and energy to change the world, to make it a better place by the end of this hour. So you came to the right place. My name's Claire O'Neill, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of an organization called A Greener Future. And we've been working for the last 20 years in sustainability for the live sector, essentially, since before anybody wanted to listen. We're also co-founders of the Green Events and Innovations Conference. Who was at GEI on Tuesday? Ah, well, that's good, because this will be fresh for you. All the cool kids were there. Who knows what GEI is, or who doesn't know what GEI is? Okay, cool, great. We've got a new victim. So on Tuesday at ILMC, every year we have a sustainability day, essentially, where everybody who's at the forefront of trying to make change, be that in energy, waste, water, communication, behavior, to see how we can make the sector better and more sustainable, essentially. So what we're wanting to do to begin, once we've introduced everybody, is to have a bit of a roundup of highlights of that, and then we're going to dig into what each of the panelists here are working on and what we can do collaboratively going forwards. So I'm very happy to be joined here today by Dale Vince, who is from Ecotricity, Forest Green Rovers FC, Devil's Kitchen, who make plant-based food, Skydiamond, who make diamonds from atmospheric carbon. What else could I say? EcoJet, the future electric-powered jets, and numerous other things. So I'm going to stop there for now, and you can intro in a moment. Vicky Chapman, who is from Live Nation, Head of Sustainability UK. And Corinne Larson from the UNFCCC. And I was told the other day the name of the department specifically with you and Danny.
It's stakeholder engagement.
Stakeholder engagement. And then we've got Eric Distler from AEG, VP, and also Head of Sustainability. Yeah. So first, I'd like each of you to tell us a bit about what your role is in relation to sustainability and live events, or beyond that may relate. And I'm going to start with Eric.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you guys for being here for this conversation. Claire, thank you for the panel, and ILMC for having this conversation dedicated to sustainability. Claire mentioned I'm the head of sustainability for AEG. I'm based in Los Angeles, and our organization is sort of a multi sort of use, entertainment, and property company. We have a ticketing company, as many of you know, sports and music business, and sustainability has really been fundamental to our organization for going back 17 years. We launched a sustainability program, I think, back when sustainability programs were quite different than they are today, and they've sort of changed a lot over a 17-year period, and so we're proud of that history. We've iterated a lot, we've learned a lot, and we have a team that is really devoted in our operations to executing our programs, our strategies all across the globe. So excited for the conversation here today.
Thank you. And Karina?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm with UN Climate Change, and the UN Climate Change is the entity within the UN that is responsible for all climate action and sustainability work. And in this context, we really try to bring together governments, of course, but also industry and civil society and research organizations in looking at how we can best implement agreements like the Paris Agreement, and how we can provide guidance to all of those stakeholders on implementation of sustainability and climate action issues.
And just before we move on from that, how's it going with the Paris Agreement? That's a small question.
That's a small question with a very big answer. Well, it's moving, and at different rates in different places and at different levels. So we're seeing some movement backwards right now with the withdrawal of the US from the Paris Agreement, but also sort of a doubling down by other countries, and certainly a lot of action at the sub-regional level, by cities, by business, by communities. So it's definitely live.
We'll go in more detail later. We also heard in the last year that we've surpassed the 1.5 target. So how has that impacted, like, from the UN perspective, your work, or what's the hope still?
I mean, there's a lot of hope, and it really serves to make our work that much more urgent. And the way that we see this getting done is through collaboration at all levels and really bringing in all stakeholder groups. So, yeah.
Thank you. Vicky?
Hi, yes, thank you. I'm Vicky from Live Nation, as Claire's introduced me already, Head of Sustainability for the UK and Ireland. I've worked with the business for 9 years, originally started with Festival Republic as Sustainability Coordinator, and that's where the journey kind of for us did start. There were lots of things happening across the organisation, but then in 2019 we came together with aligning our principles across Europe and across Live Nation globally with the publication of our Green Nation Charter, and that sets out our core goals for our reduction targets and also aspirations in important areas such as waste, food, procurement, travel, etc. Since then I've been implementing the charter across our festivals, our venues, and starting on our tours as well. It's been a journey, and continuing that work is an ongoing process.
And Dale?
Excuse me. I'm primarily an environmentalist, and I use business as a tool to bring about environment change, beginning in 1995 when I founded the world's first green energy company to sell a new kind of electricity. And excuse me, in the early 2000s, sorry, I've got a frog in my throat. I started in electricity because it's the single biggest source of carbon emissions in our country. Early 2000s, I looked for the second and third biggest source and found it was transport and food. And that those three together, energy, transport and food, are 80% of all of our personal carbon emissions, the carbon emissions of any size company, and indeed whole countries. It's a very great slide rule to run across anything. And so I campaign and start businesses in the fields of energy, transport and food. I've been doing that for a little while now.
And just, can you tell us about wind phones?
Okay, so I also have a background in festivals. I spent 10 years living on the road. I've spent the entire decade of the 80s living on the road. And towards the end of that decade, I had a little windmill on the trailer, the roof of my trailer, and I went to Glastonbury with a new idea, just as mobile phones came into the world. I don't know if you guys will remember, the first ones were about that big, and you held them like this, and the battery lasted an hour. I built a 60-foot tower from an old pylon, stuck a windmill on top and some old train batteries on the bottom, and hired 4 mobile phones and ran a thing I called wind phones. And it was really interesting because the impact it had on people was the most interesting thing. When everybody turned up at Glastonbury, they would come to make a phone call, and they all would do the same thing. They would say, I'm calling you on a wind phone, and I don't know what happens when the wind stops. And then on the last day of Glastonbury, they were arranging to be picked up, and they'd say the same thing. And it was very funny. And it's like nobody could see past what I thought was the obvious, that it was a mobile phone and a windmill. And they were saying, can I get one of these at home? How do I get one? And I'm like, well, it's just a mobile phone. And it's a kind of an interesting lesson in psychology.
And we're going to talk about your kind of key takeaways from GEI, because everyone was there or speaking there. And just sticking with you for now, Del, you mentioned energy, transport and food, and you were on 3 or 4 sessions during GEI, which covered those topics. So food in particular, what were your takeaways or messages relating to food?
Yeah, I think food is almost the most important of the 3 topics now, because the energy transition is well underway. We have all of the technology we need. We're at 50% green on the grid in our country now. We'll be at 100% in 5 years' time. The electrification of transport is what we have to do, and that's well underway as well, with electric cars taking over the road. Buses are here, trucks are coming out of R&D, and so are electric planes, actually. We expect to be in the skies with a thing called EcoJet in a couple of years' time, with electric planes powered by hydrogen and fuel cells. And that leaves food. And food for me is like the cow in the room, because we know all of the compelling reasons why we have to change what we eat, and yet we still don't do it. Our food choice is not just driving the climate crisis, but the human health crisis and the global wildlife crisis as well. And it's the biggest change that we can all make, that any event can make, and it shouldn't cost any money either. It should be the easiest and biggest change we can all make. And I think it's the last frontier in those 3 things of energy, transport and food.
And just sticking on food for now, Vicky, your experience with Live Nation, you've been doing various different projects. Can you tell us about those?
Yeah, we've been like one of our charter principles around food is to acknowledge the carbon impact of food, and over the years we have been exploring that through our festivals by nudging people in the direction of making their own choices, but educating them about the impacts of like high carbon food. So the way we've gone about doing that is measuring the carbon impact of the food that's on sale at some of our festivals, and then publicising that either on the menu or on the app. We've developed on our visitor festival apps. It has all the food options, and there's all the dietary requirements that you can search and filter for, and adding in food like the high, medium or low impact of that particular food as well. It is a very big process to do all the calculations and get all the information from our vendors, and then put that information out there to the public to make their own choices. And we have found that it has, just having that information through our customer surveys, it has influenced people by having that information there, because I do think a lot of people don't know, and the more we can do at festivals where people are a bit more open to trying new things, the better really. So yeah, that's one thing we've done, and also as a result of that, with an area that we know we can control more, because obviously influence the audience, but in terms of the crew catering and what we put on in crew catering, we make sure we have at least a meat-free day in the crew catering there, to encourage and educate people about that as well.
I've always thought that food is like a six-pointer, like to use a football terminology, because people are going to eat anyway, whether they're at your event or not. So if you make what they're going to eat better for them and better for the planet, then you're not only replacing the meals that you're serving, but also what they would have eaten as well. So it's a kind of double win from perspective. Have you got any comments, examples, or experiences related to food from both UN and AEG?
Yeah, I would say that this week a report came out from the Tyndall Center for Climate Change Research on their analysis of the concert held by Massive Attack last year in Bristol. And they showed that it was effectively the greenest concert that's ever been, the most sustainable. And what I thought was so interesting with that report was that the largest gains in emissions reductions came from the food by serving the vegetarian.
It was 100% plant-based on the Downs. Both Dale and I worked on that one. We'll go into more details on that.
Yeah. So I think people often overlook this element and don't think that will have that big of an impact, but that report showed that, in fact, it made a huge impact in the overall emissions reductions.
Yeah, we did a study with AGF last year as well that looked at, originally we'd always thought as the industry that it was about 90% audience travel or travel, but all of those studies excluded the impact of food and drink. So when you brought the food and drink in, it was about a third, at least, of the impact.
Yeah.
And Eric, from AEG's perspective, have you had any experiences with changing menus or trying to? I know certainly the O2 in the UK have.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question, and I think focusing on food and the optionality for our fans is really important, because it's what our fans see, touch, and feel. They often don't see the work we're doing in energy and water, but food is what they experience, and the materials that food comes in is really important too. From a food option standpoint, we're doing a lot of work, as you know, at BST Hyde Park and All Points East, plant-based, vegan options, the O2 as well. Not only introducing those food options, but putting signage up that explains to the patrons the carbon footprint and the healthy benefits of the choices, right? Understanding what you can select and what that means. And I think that education is really important, right? There are times when maybe you sort of slide in the plant-based burger next to the meat burger and don't tell the patron and tell them after and let them know that it actually tastes just as good. But there are other places where you do want to educate and provide that knowledge up front. So we do a lot of work with that in Europe, and the same thing in the US as well. Our festivals are great places where we can activate, right? In a stadium, we own sports teams and sports venues too, looking at permanent solutions, in addition to solutions that we can do with artists that are coming through, sports teams that are coming through. But at festival, we activate, right? So we have an opportunity to set up education, sort of gamify it, and we've been doing a lot of that across our global footprint.
Excellent. And Dale, what's your thought on choice and education versus just a hard line of this is what you're getting served? Bear in mind you've got a football club that's been vegan for 10 years?
Yeah, longer. Yeah, but I think choice is interesting as a concept. We were discussing this at GEI on Tuesday. The idea that it's important to put on a range of choices for your customers at an event or something like that. I think it's also important to take responsibility as a food provider, actually, and improve those choices. And for me, it means narrowing those choices. It's not enough to say, well, I'm offering, beef and shrimp and all them other things because people might want it. I don't think that's right. Not when we know the impact of those foods on the environment and on people's health. And my experience at Forest Green Rovers began in 2010. I rescued the football club and immediately bumped into a kind of ethical problem for me, which is that the football club served red meat and meat and dairy generally. And on day one of the rescue mission, I changed that. I couldn't contemplate being part of the meat trade. That's my issue. But I took the club rapidly on a journey through the ending of red meat, white meat, fish, and then dairy. And to begin with, there were people at the club that said that these changes would kill the club, that nobody would come to a football game, and if they did come, they wouldn't eat the food. They were very clear about that, but I had to do it anyway. I would have rather walked away than be a part of the animal industry. And if you fast forward to today, we have 4 times as many people coming to games, and we sell 10 times as much food. And we made a reputation for the kind of food that we provide. The quality. Yes, we have the kind of infamy of being a vegan football club, and that's like made us globally famous. But the quality of the food is exceptional. And then if you look at our fans, who were some were angry at the beginning, but most were just skeptical. You talk to them now, and they say it's changed their lives. They've gone vegetarian, they've gone vegan, they're buying electric cars and solar panels. This whole environment thing that we've done at Forest Green Rovers, we've reached people through football. As you say, Eric, we can activate people through live events. I've seen the same at festivals. I've seen it in football and sport generally with the UN. We work on this Sport for Climate Action program. And it's about reaching the billions of sports fans on the planet and making them fans of the environment just by showing them what can be done.
And you touched upon the Act 1.5 show on the Downs, which you may have seen, the world record-breaking lowest carbon gig that's happened. There was a fully vegan option there, or that was the only option, actually. And the way that it was advertised in advance was, rather than telling people you're not having meat or dairy, it was advertising each of the meals that were going to be served and each of the traders that were going to be providing food, to show the diversity in all of the options rather than what was lacking. But there was pushback on that.
Yeah, there was pushback, I think, from the promoter, wasn't it? And it was based on fear, the same kind of fear that I faced at Forest Green Rovers, that people wouldn't be happy if they came to a gig and couldn't have, whatever they might normally have or think they might want or something like that. But in the event, on the day, the food stands were queued completely across the arena, and it took far too long to get fed at all. The food was massively popular, and that's what we find at Forest Green Rovers. And it's all the same foods that you might want: burgers, chips, curries and stuff like that. One of our big lessons from Forest Green Rovers was not to label food as vegan or plant-based. Just don't talk about what's not in it. Talk about what's in it. So if it's a lasagna, for example, let's call it a black bean lasagna rather than a vegan lasagna. And immediately you're not putting up shutters for people.
When we did make the change for crew catering, we put out information about kind of why we were doing it and the benefits of reducing meat in your diet. And we at the time, it was because it was Paul McCartney's Meat Free Monday initiative, so I had posters and a few flyers. And one of my colleagues wrote on the flyer a little speech bubble coming out of Paul McCartney's mouth saying, "Vicky, where's my bacon sandwich?" and put it down when he was eating. But now it started the conversation, and now we've been doing it so long, it's just normal.
Yeah.
People know that they expect that it's that day, or it's going to be kind of spread out of a few days. And as long as we make sure it is nutritious and people get what they need out of it to be working on site all day, then it's just a different option.
Yeah. And just another thing that you mentioned previously, thinking of Act 1.5 and what happened at GEI, there's a lot of talk around energy. There's obviously a lot happening with batteries, grid. Can you tell us a bit what Live Nation have been working on recently in that respect?
Yeah, so in terms of talking about our targets, we do have a 50% reduction target in our emissions of scope 1 and 2, which is basically energy that you're buying or energy that you're creating on site. So we have been very heavily focused on that target to make sure we're in line with our goals. So we've been looking at energy across the board and the first thing for the festivals is we have switched the majority of our festivals now to hydro-treated vegetable oil, which is a fossil-free type of biofuel, which, it does emit less carbon on paper, but it's classed as carbon neutral. So there are still emissions that come out of it, but it is kind of neutralized out when you balance it out with it being renewable. So that's one big change that we've made on our festivals. And we're also looking into going further than relying on combustion engines to create the power that we need. And we are looking into grid connections for our festival sites where we have a long-term relationship with the landowner, or it's land that we do own part of ourselves. So last year at Electric Picnic Festival in Ireland, we installed our first grid connection, so super excited about that, and that powered the main stage. And we're looking at ways we can connect that grid with batteries and how we can kind of like make the best of that grid power now that we've got it in future.
Does Melvin like batteries now? I heard he didn't like
We're getting there. It's an understanding that they're part of the transition, and we obviously about everything of all these choices. Like there's always going to be kind of like positives and negatives. So as long as we're aware of what the negatives are and we are able to mitigate those as well, then that's the approach that we're taking. And then in our venues, like all of our venues are powered by 100% renewable energy with good energy, and that was a change that we made quite quickly when I came into my head of sustainability role as something quite quickly we can make that change. And even despite prices in the energy market and prices compared to a non-renewable supply increasing by 20%, around 20%, we're still able to stick to that commitment. So I'm really pleased about that.
That's great. And on the grid side, it's such a win-win-win because most generators are completely over-specced. Like often it's like 20% of the power of the generator is being used, which means the fuel just burns for nothing, which means money is burning for nothing. And when it's connected to a grid, you only use the kilowatt hours that you use, and it also reduces the trucking, the kit. Obviously, you still need the distro. And we'll come back to that in more detail as well. I just wanted to check whether there was any things from AEG on a power side that you wanted to share.
Yeah, I mean, power and energy are huge topics in our business, and there's some gentlemen in the back here from some of who are GMs and leaders in our European business that have done work for over a decade plus on everything from renewable supply to green purchasing all across our venues in Germany and in Europe. We're looking at PPAs across our UK business, looking at solar installation in Benham Apollo. And from a festival standpoint, it's really interesting when we start looking at cleaner fuel sources and we start having conversations with our ops leads, right? Really the people in our business that make these decisions. The sustainability team is sort of there to push along, to guide, but we aren't the experts that put on all of our events, that run our venues. I often say that sustainability doesn't really happen in our team, right? It happens out in the business, on the ground, in the venues. And one sort of quick example is, we have a lot of pilots. I think we like pilots a lot in the work that we do. We start small and then we expand. 3 years ago, we started lighting our parking lot towers at Coachella and Stagecoach festivals with solar powered light arrays. We learned from that. We found ways to essentially build in some of that relationship, stakeholder engagement that you need with your traditional power supplier and your new, hybrid supplier. Fast forward to this past year, we were able to power 3 stages at 2 of our U.S. festivals, Portola Festival in San Francisco and Camp Flog Gnaw in Los Angeles, with fully solar-powered batteries, a minor hybridized approach, and we were able to reduce our fuel usage by 91%. No sound, obviously, from these battery generators, and really start the conversation with our leads. And now what our team does, our ops team, is they plan for batteries, they plan for renewable sources of power from the get-go. So planning used to always work the other way, right? So you've got your solutions that are either grid-based. We tap into shore power wherever we can, but then we sort of plan around that, and we'll slide in the batteries where we can. But now we plan from the reverse, right? And so it's a shifting in that mindset, and that's allowed us to do things like remove all dirty diesel generators from Coachella. We have all renewable diesel, which is affordable in California for us to find, so we take advantage of that. And so I think constantly looking for small pilots that we can then expand, and then really in our permanent venues, everything from an 1,800 panel solar array at Crypto.com Arena, which we put on almost 20 years ago, to battery power, Tesla power. We're constantly looking at new innovations, and that's helping us get to our future sustainability goals, which is huge energy reduction targets that we have in our business.
Amazing. So I'm just going to stick on batteries and power for a second, because we did on the Massive Attack show on the Downs, it was 100% battery powered, and we're now working on the same for Lido, which will happen on Victoria Park in June, first show with Massive Attack again. So we started Grid Fairies. Do you want to talk to what happened on the site there and also the objective of that project?
Yeah, can do. First, I just want to pick up on something that Eric said. I love the fact that you flip the approach and you start with a battery renewable first approach. And you reminded me of something that's happening in food as well. In New York State, for example, the hospitals flip the menu. So you don't have a vegan option, you have a meat option. And the first choice is plant-based. And there's been a massive reduction in animal consumption and a huge, what would you call it, like a huge score for audience appreciation of the food. You know, it's really worked really well. So that's an option as well.
On that, actually, we did that on the Bring Me the Horizon tour as well. We said if you want a special meal, aka meat, then you can order that separately and we'll prepare it for you. But otherwise, the whole thing is plant-based.
Yeah.
There's a way to also prevent a mutiny on like 6 weeks.
Yeah, so I mean, coming to the Massive Attack gig, the power side, I think was like, it was a fantastic thing to do the whole gig because we pushed all of the boundaries and the audience appreciation of that was really big. There were 30,000 people there. I stood on stage briefly just to talk about what was happening with the gig, and I said that, you know, one of the biggest things happening, you won't hear it, and I just paused for a minute and said, you know, you won't hear it, you won't smell it, and, you know, the audience were like, you know, big cheers for that. Fully plant-based, big cheers for fully plant-based. Honestly, the appreciation was incredible.
And
but
he said no animals were harmed in the making of this show.
That's right. That's right. And one thing we learned on the tech side, that gig and the Glastonbury gig, is that the tech guys, the power guys, they say the battery power is the best power they've ever had. When there's a big bass drop and a huge spike in demand, and you've got a generator, then it works hard to speed itself up and come up the power curve, and you get a lag, you get a drop off in voltage and things like that. Not with a battery; it's instantaneous. It just meets that demand, and that's interesting because the perception going in was, will it be good enough? Perception coming out was actually it's better.
Absolutely. We were watching the show and thinking, please turn the white lights off. Or I was, you were calm. I thought, please don't run out. And there was 50% left in the main stage battery by the end. There was more than enough. And there were Volta trucks that were electric going around with other batteries on the back, topping up the batteries that were around site. So it was a big network of electric sources going around and topping up. The ideal would be to have grid with batteries connected so that you don't need to have that extra element, I guess.
At that point on the white lights, that's something that we learned through the grid connection because that's the one that takes the most power. And if there's a way that we can work with our technical teams and the people putting on the displays to reduce the white light, then that's a way that we can actually reduce what the power draws are.
More black backgrounds, what we need. We had that on one, like a big show here in London where there was one advert from a sponsor that was all white clouds, and you could see that there was this massive spike in energy just for that one sponsor advert, more than during the gigs. So it's really important what goes on the screens. Karina, I want to come to you. So we talked about the Act 1.5 show, and kind of off the back of that, there was the UN Accelerator Cities. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So first of all, just to say within UN climate change, we like to work directly with various industry groups. And so for that reason, we started the Entertainment and Culture for Climate Action Alliance, which brings together a number of creative industries, film, music, television, the arts, and so forth, to really give them a platform to participate in the work that we're doing, but also for them to come together and share knowledge, to collaborate on projects, and for us to help in convening the right groups of people, whether it be government representatives or technology innovators and so forth. And so working with them and inspired by the work that Act 1.5 and Massive Attack had done, we decided to pilot, which we also very much believe in, together with the city of Liverpool, who were really eager to learn from that experience and to see if we could embed within the city a plan to massively decarbonize the live events, film and TV sectors in Liverpool. And it was the perfect city because of its historical background in the music sector. But it really gave us the opportunity to bring together an amazing group of organizations, of research centers, and the government, but including, of course, A Greener Future and Ecotricity, and even the likes of the European Space Agency, to look at sort of 8 different tracks of how we could rapidly decarbonize. And a lot of these were very much new innovations and things we weren't sure were going to work, but we thought at this level, this is the perfect experimentation lab for what we were doing. And we were able to get the national government, the local government, who were very, very eager to participate in this, to already start to identify what are some of the blockages in terms of regulatory issues or technology issues or needs that we might have, so that we can really move forward on this. And I think an important part of the work that we're doing is to capture along the way all of the lessons that we're learning, what's going well, where we run into troubles and why, as well as the data on looking at the health of the city, the pollution of the city as a result of the work that we're doing, so that we can really share that broadly with other cities, with the music and television industry. And we've importantly had a number of cities from around the world asking to be the next accelerator city now, which is great.
And so it's quite an international audience here at the International Live Music Conference. So how would anybody go about like applying, or what's the kind of criteria, what you're looking for going forwards?
Yeah, I mean, anyone who's interested can get in touch with either the City of Liverpool or with us at UN Climate Change. And we're really looking right now to see what are the important elements that a city would need to consider. What kind of support would we need to provide them to make sure that it's a really successful environment for them to work forward. We've also had a lot of interest from the Sustainable Market Initiative of King Charles, which looks to really support this in the long term by getting the right industries involved to support along the way. So we see it as a continuing process. And I think we'll gather a lot of learning these next few months that will help us to know what are the necessary pieces for it to thrive.
It's such an amazing multi-stakeholder collaboration, because we've spent so much time trying to work almost in our bubbles, trying to change things, and you find that eventually you hit a ceiling as to how far you can go. Like if you're organising an event or running a venue, if you're in a city or a nation that doesn't have green energy or supports industrial animal agriculture, or has a poor transport network, how are you supposed to pull it out of thin air? So this really took it to another level, the most that I've seen in 20 years of working in this as well. And Vicky, you've been doing work with local authorities as well.
That's something I've seen. I'm part of the Vision for Sustainable Events Forum, which is a network of outdoor events coming together to take action on climate change. Greener Future, you're involved in it as well. And the Green Events Code of Practice has been put together to give kind of guidelines and like suggestions and just principles of best practice for events to take. And that came about through during the pandemic. There was a parliamentary committee on the future of music festivals, and kind of the result of that was putting together this code for sustainable events, and that in the last year has been tested out with 10 different local authorities, and we were involved as well as the kind of the Vision for Sustainable Events, but through Reading Festival and Parklife, because Reading Borough Council were part of the pilot, and so was Manchester. So yeah, just having there was a series of workshops that the events came to with the local authorities, and just that connection with the different sizes of events that were there, talking about shared issues and kind of problems we were coming against, but also shared opportunities of what we do need from the city, from the local authority that we are putting these events on in, and how we can all support each other to work through some of these challenges. And grid connection came up in some of the sites that are used for events a lot and used regularly. Even water provision, some festivals have to kind of tank in water, and it's all of the transport that goes along with that. So having consistent water supply at those sites as well. So yeah, I think it's
fit for purpose event sites essentially. I don't know why we haven't done that in the last 4 or 5 decades, but we're getting there. And so we're looking at the local. How about the geopolitical landscape, which is as stable as the climate at the moment? I'm going to start with you on that. Karina, because obviously there's the drill, baby, drill rhetoric, and what impact is that having from your perspective on, I suppose, the move towards sustainability, the ability to even do that, and the policies that we have internationally?
Well, I think that that it's affecting industries in that, in some ways, that there's a fear that there will be a backlash for the work that they've done so far in sustainability. And what we're seeing is that that many companies have looked at that and said, well, it wouldn't make sense financially and otherwise to start going backwards. So they're going forwards. Some of them are boldly announcing that. Others are keeping it much lower level and choosing not to speak as loudly as they might have been, but to keep the work going because it makes sense from all the different aspects. So, and you see that, I mean, not just in music industry, but in the car industries and in all these, that they've done so much work that actually it would cost more to go backwards at this point. And eventually, when things turn around, they'll have to start everything up again and already be behind. So. So we see that as something that people are talking about loudly or not, but still moving forward. Yeah.
And Eric, you're in the epicenter.
Yeah.
Well, not quite. I mean, there's a lot of epicenters around the world, actually.
Yeah,
You're in the
yeah.
noisiest epicenter.
Yeah, it's an interesting time. This is a topic that I spend a lot of time thinking about and talking about to our leaders. I feel like what I do more than anything is making the case for resources, right? Getting more resources devoted to our teams so that we can execute and get work done, more staff so that we can get work done, and a lot of that comes back to making the business case, right? And I think all of us up here have to do that day in and day out. The business case for everything we're doing, what's the payback, what's the investment, who does it matter to, what are the value levers to our company for sustainability? And I could talk a lot about the value that comes from partners, right? The more corporate partners that are coming to us that want to build sustainability into these deals, there's a right way to do it. Certainly if you involve the sustainability teams, to all the consumer research that's showing the demands from our younger generations that want sustainability built into the products and services that they're engaging with. So I think those value levers are there. And then there's a regulatory environment, right? That I know is changing, and I think there's some changes maybe even as of yesterday to how the CSRD efforts and some of the California Senate bills that we have in our country. And so I say all that because while I think changing political environments are very real, and in some cases mostly symbolic, but also very real, they also sort of come and go, right? And I think the business case for why sustainability exists in our business is much stronger than the come and go and the sort of the passerby nature of elected officials and politics, right? And Dale, you talked about this a little bit, on Tuesday at GEI, right? There's such a strong case within our business that our CFOs and our COOs and our senior executives have gotten behind. I've sat in front from them and made the case that's the business rationale why we do this. Yes, our team can translate that into carbon emissions, and yes, we can translate that into impact on the planet. But the first and foremost reason is because it's good for our business, right? And so there's a lot of examples of that. So when we have changing sort of political environments, sometimes it's easy to sort of get down based upon what's currently happening. But I know that the 20-year plus case, you go back even further when you think of the environmental movement, is stronger than I think what is going to last, hopefully just 4 years in our country. So.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Do you want to comment to that, both on the political situation and some of the things that have been said here, but also related to the cost of sustainability, and, because I know you've got a good memory, sponsorship?
Sponsorship, yeah, sure thing. I think that if you take renewable energy for an example, I think it's an irresistible force of nature, actually. We've seen a drop in the cost of solar panels in the last 20 years of something like 98%. Wind energy has fallen, but not by as much. And both of them together, they're far cheaper than any other form of power that we can make. And so the idea that Donald Trump will cancel those programs, will hold back renewable energy in America, I find improbable because of the economic harm it would do to the country. And he's a guy that cares about business and money, so I think to a degree it's posturing. But I don't think it even matters. As you say, he's there for 4 years. Renewable energy's been going on for a long time. I went to COP3 in 1997, and the big oil and car companies then were carving up the sessions to send a representative to every meeting to disrupt it and to hold back progress. So if you fast forward to today, this is not a new thing. coming from fossil fuel companies. Climate denial is not a new thing. It's relatively new compared to 1997. It's a losing battle that these people are fighting. And plus, of course, what Eric talked about, which is what people want. What our customers want. I see it in business, you see it in the live sector. People expect businesses to take responsibility for the environment and to build it into what they offer. This is what people want. So I think it's a losing fight. Anybody on that side of life is like King Canute, sat on the beach trying to resist the incoming tide. It's coming, so get your wellies on, that's all I say. Sponsorship? We talked about sponsorship on Tuesday, and I realized I only talked about one side of the coin. At Forest Green Rovers, we won't take sponsorship from industries that we think are having a bad impact. Obviously, that would be factory farming, any kind of animal industry, in fact, tobacco, weapons, the obvious ones. But also gambling, which has a huge impact on people's lives and has taken over Premier League football in our country. Fast food, I object to fast food sponsorship of sports events. I think it's, sport washing is a harmful product. We know that. You take bacon, for example. It's listed by the World Health Organization on the same grade as a carcinogen as cigarettes, grade 1. And we've done a lot to control smoking and make people aware of the dangers. We don't do anything to make them aware of the dangers of bacon, and that's a responsibility I think that that we should all take more. But anyway, I also am on the other side of sponsorship, giving sponsorship, like for the Downs event, for example, and the Liverpool Accelerator City event. And I realize now that Claire wanted me to talk about that. And why do I do that? It's not for a return for the company Ecotricity. It's to be able to make something new happen, to be able to push a boundary and to open people's eyes to something that can be done, which is what I live for. That was what I've been doing for a while. And I think there are other sponsors out there. We certainly feel them at Forest Green Rovers. If you look at our lineup of sponsors, we absolutely outperform the league that we're in because we've become a magnet for green companies, people that are either starting out with green products or greening up their products. They come to Forest Green to be a sponsor. And this is also, I think, like a tidal change in business affairs. So I say get on the right side of that.
Absolutely. Vicky or Eric, have you got anything more on sponsors before I move on to another topic?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. We do work really closely with our sponsorship department and sustainability to make sure that sustainability is kind of part of the conversation when it comes to new sponsors, but also established sponsors, and how we can work together to achieve shared goals. One example, this summer we've been working with Pepsi on our shared kind of plastic reduction strategies. They're looking at it as a business, and it's one of our Green Charter goals as well. And this year that they trialled post-mix soft drinks at one of our bars at Reading Festival, just to reduce plastic ultimately, and pour Pepsi straight into a cup so people can enjoy it, similar to at a cinema, for example. And also looking into different incentives for waste reduction and increasing recycling to rewards, and they did a great activation on a reward scheme at Reading as well. So I think that's a really good example of us working together on shared sustainability goals. And we also, one of our big sponsors is Big Green Coach as well, from the travel perspective, and offering that really important service to get people to the festivals by coach, and what we can do to enhance that and make that attractive and get kind of more people on filling the seats ultimately.
So there's more and more opportunities for green-minded businesses or solutions to actually come and provide what you need as an event through the sponsorship deal. Eric, anything else on that?
Yeah, just to say, to echo Vicky's comment, it is all about collaborating with our sponsorship team, our global partnerships team. Obviously, we have a lot of current sponsors, right? And so it's a great opportunity for our sustainability department to look at those organizations. In many cases, the sustainability world is relatively small. We may know that sustainability leader in that organization. And I think what we try to do is we make sure we try to have sustainability talk to sustainability, right? Which is often a conversation that you have 12 other people on, right? All the sports marketing folks from XYZ company and our sponsorship team, they can figure out how to create what we're talking about into a deal that's price and activation or whatever. They're the experts. And many of you are probably in this crowd are experts in that space. But if you bring sustainability together, you've got like-minded, ethos driven. They're inside that organization trying to do their, their efforts and improve their efforts as well. And usually we can find a place, to echo what you mentioned, where we have a sustainability goal, they have a sustainability goal. We can do something together under the auspices of a sponsorship that help us both get to those goals. So one example is Coca-Cola, a longtime partner at our LA Live property and across our global business. And they have a 2030 corporate sustainability goal all around getting their poured beverages into reusable cups, right? And so, or reusable, cups or any form of reusability. And we have a massive reusability efforts across our global business, efforts that exist at the O2, both our large arenas in Germany. And for over 3.5 years, we've been using reusables at 6 festivals in the US and 11 venues in the US, and we've diverted over 5 million cups from the landfill, right? So Coca-Cola shows up and says, we want to partner with you on this. Not only did that roll into our current deal, but we were able to engage the sustainability department of Coca-Cola, which also contributed funding to the deal. And we obviously made sure that there were sort of the ethos and the values of sustainability existed within the construct of that very deal. But that's sort of an example of how do you work with an existing partner. And as we're going out and seeking new partners, and we're really looking at the leading edge, cutting edge, sustainable, innovative partners that can be a new partner that can come in a real significant way to our business.
So I'm conscious that I want to leave 10 minutes for people to ask questions. So we've got like 2 minutes 40 to talk about extreme weather.
Oh, geez.
But I want to start with Karina on that from the UN perspective, because obviously there is an increase in extreme weather events. We'll talk about it from a live perspective and the things that are impacting us directly. Mm-hmm. But what have you been experiencing from your perspective, what's been happening over the last couple of years?
I mean, it's clear that there's a large increase in these kinds of events, and something that people are experiencing all over the world. And I think it gets to both parts of the work that we do, which is trying to prevent even more severe events to happen with temperature increases. But also, we need to be looking at the adaptation side. How do we remain resilient, whether it's in a city level or for industries? How do we sort of future-proof the things that we're doing in the places we live? And it's a very, very important part of the discussions that we're having at the COPs, for example. We find, of course, countries in the global south are more at risk due to these events. They're much less prepared infrastructure-wise. But there's also a really important issue of the cultural heritage that's at stake around the world, and which, that's intrinsically aligned with people's own identities, national identities, cultural identities, and so how to best protect those. And it also gives an opportunity, when we bring in culture, and oftentimes I think culture has been a bit of a missing link in the climate discussions. But when we start to bring in culture, we realize what's at stake and how important it is to do the work now, so that we hopefully won't have to do as much on building the resilience later on. Yeah.
You remind me of Megan Best from Body and Soul. Talked about how they lost 100 trees on their site, that they knew all those trees that had been there for obviously decades before they were even there, and because of the floods, they were all gone as a result, so completely changing landscapes. And I mean, Eric, you live in LA, so do you want to give your account of what you've experienced over the last couple of months?
Yeah, and I know we talked about this a bit on Tuesday. I mean, yeah, it's been, personally and professionally challenging. I was evacuated out of my home on 2 hours into the fires burning on January 7th and still not back. So, when these events happen, they obviously are very real. They affect and impact people, and they affect and impact, businesses and, in our events and in our, sporting stadiums and such. And so I know we talked about this a little bit on Tuesday, but there's both sort of a human component to this as well as a kind of business component. I think the human component is just, for us, is to be really conscious of when we sort of enter the conversation and talk about sustainability and climate change, when people are evacuated from homes, when there's tens of thousands of homes that have been burned and lost. It's not really the time. I think here we are now on the stage, maybe a few months later is the time, but in the moment it's not really the time to say, hey, well, this is happening because of climate change. At least I don't believe so. I think that's proselytizing and sort of taking advantage and latching onto just a really hard moment when people just need empathy. when you start then talking about what it does to our businesses, I mean, yes, risk management, insurance deductibles going up, the risk and safety to our patrons, we're experiencing all that, and I think we're going to see these extreme events increasingly more so, and I think even more of a reason for us to continue doing the work we're doing.
Moby also talked about this. He joined us from LA on Zoom on Tuesday, and he said how he'd walked around amongst the devastation. First, he said that he thought that the people not talking about climate change might be because it's just so obvious, like it doesn't even need mentioning. But then he also pointed out that the only things left standing, even though there was metal and buildings completely melted and cars disappeared, were the trees. And then there was one thing in particular, and I don't know if I'm going to get the fruit right, but I think it was a grapefruit tree in somebody's front garden, and the fruit was still perfect. And he said so it was a really amazing moment of realizing all the man-made things disappear and nature's still standing. So there is hope. Dale?
I think extreme weather last year cost the world $320 billion in losses. Only half of that was insured. That was a massive increase from the year before, and we'll see a big increase in coming years. I think the event in California cost more than that on its own, and that hasn't been added into the numbers yet. And we see extreme weather in a less extreme way at Forest Green Rovers. We've been having more rain and bigger rain, and it's been inundating our pitch, and it's happening across all sports. And every year we've been rebuilding our pitch with bigger drains to take account of the bigger and bigger rain. It's been going for about 3 years now. And this summer I was at Leeds Festival, which was hit by a massive storm. Tents were blowing away. It was like something out of I don't know, the Wizard of Oz, to see these tents like whizzing up into the air. The security fence was blowing over, stages were shut, and it was a proper in-your-face kind of experience of extreme weather, which I think is useful actually for people to have.
And that brings it real to the teams on the ground, making sure it's in their emergency response plans. And the team at Leeds were working so hard to make sure that people were safe, and that was their priority. And making sure kind of those communication channels, like with the app and the messages that we could use for like telling people about what's happening on stage. It's stay in your tents, like this stage is closed, the arena's going to remain closed for a while, like stay in your tents, and kind of giving people advice on kind of keeping their tents from not blowing away. And what resources were on site. We had to do a whip around all of the camping stores to check how many tent pegs were on site, and whether we had to get more tent pegs in to make sure that people's individual tents were secure.
You were in go on.
Yeah. Well, I was running around with a hammer because I borrowed a hammer to do my tent, and I think I had a pink top on, which was the colour of your staff, and so everybody assumed I was staff, and they're like, "Can you help me with my tent?" I was running around helping everybody with their tent.
I'm going to come to questions. So anybody from our audience got any questions? Do put your hands up. Don't be shy. Gordon, is there a...
It was a kind of semi-question and observation at the same time for Dale. For Forest Green Rovers, when you switch to food, I think a lot of what this business always looks at is the money side of things. And I'm sure at the start of your careers you're hearing, sustainability, but it's going to cost us. I'm just wondering, financially, is there more money coming into the club through food and beverage now than there was when you took over?
Yeah, we sell 10 times as much food as we did back in the day, and the crowds have gone up fourfold, so it's not just more people, but more people eating even more food. And I think one of the keys to that is we've made the food better. In all of the areas that I work, I think it's important to show that the alternative, whether it's cars, food, whatever it is better. And our fans and people come to us just for the food. Our football's good as well, but I always meet people that say, "I'm here for the food, actually. I'm a fan of football, but I've heard about your food." So we just put on great food. When the burgers we replaced were costing 4 pence each, so you can just imagine how bad they were and what was in them. And we just put on great food. Our fans love it. We just converted them. It's not hard to do, is what I would say. The key is in it being a good experience. Like Eric said, that's what people want, and you can have that without meat and dairy.
And did you also look at beverages? Did you have to change beverages for similar reasons?
A little bit, because it's not widely known, but beer has fish bladder in it, for example, but lager doesn't. And wine can have, So it's just a matter of going through the supply chain and finding vegan wines and beers and that kind of stuff. It wasn't that hard, actually. And people don't even notice that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo the stuff with the food. It's interesting because we catered vegetarian from the outset on our events and then moved into just making it vegan. And it's kind of always interesting to look at who gets pissed off about it. In my experience, I remember like these 3 very overweight Canadian ladies at one of our events just going off to eat steak and smoke cigarettes on their way. And it was kind of like, well, that's the opposite of how I grew up. There was never anything vegetarian when I was a child, and there was this massive fuss because it was just fucking meat everywhere, you know. And so it's like, oh well, you can get used to what I grew up with, you know. And if you can't handle it for 3 days, then you know, just go off to Greg's or something. But anyway, the point I wanted to actually ask was really about rail sponsorship. I've been trying to I really want to engage with Interrail or Eurorail about seeing if there's ways to collaborate with them on getting delegates to our events. And I just really wanted to ask if any of you have connected with Interrail or Eurorail. I think they use one's a brand and I think one's the name of the company. And if you've had any kind of progress with that, because I pitched them a few years ago and got as far as actually sending a proposal, and then they were like, nah.
Yeah, they're quite hard to break. You know, don't know if anyone else has experience, but we've, through the Massive Attack shows, we nationally were able to work with train companies. So GWR was the first one that laid on extra trains for the end of the show. Massive Attack finished 15 minutes early, and then we laid on extra trains so that people could get the train back. And then electric buses to connect them. And that really opened the doors with GWR. And there was a lot of press as well, which was helpful, especially because they wanted to do rail replacement bus services. And we're like, you've been on the BBC now, you have to send the trains. So that was fortunate. But then there's also the train line are very interested in doing more work as well. And the train line cover rails all across Europe. There's certainly more competing platforms coming up for the train line. So they'd probably be worthwhile speaking to as well. I don't know if you've had experience with...
Trainline do have at Glastonbury last year, it was a campaign that was I Came by Train. So and that is aimed at like the events, like going to like sporting events and music events, and like kind of like being proud that you came by train and being part of this movement. But yeah, I just saw it at Glastonbury last year.
Yeah, I mean, I think that being able to offer something where people actually get a discount, because we surveyed everyone that had traveled to our event, and we're like, what would, if you're coming from Germany or Spain, what would actually, what would encourage you to do it? And they were like, well, price is the main one. You
and
know?
That's a problem, that the price is so much more expensive to do the worst emitting. And that's a whole topic for another session. But we've got 1 minute left, so I just want last words from each of the panelists about what you would like to either see the live industry doing, what's going to happen next, or your hopes. You can choose from those 3 things.
Me?
Yeah.
Well, I'll roll them all into one. What I'd like to see is what I also would hope to see, which is change the menu. You know, people in the live event industry, change the menu, because it's the easiest thing you can do. You'll find people will be with you, and you can make the biggest single difference to the environment, to human health, and to wildlife. I only touched upon it briefly, but the way that we grow plants to feed animals, to feed ourselves, has deprived wildlife globally of habitat. And if we were all plant-based, for example, we can give back 75% of all farmland globally to wildlife, which is how we halt the decline. So if you eat farm animals, you're literally eating nature.
Vicky?
I would say, continued collaboration between all parties, like festival companies, like promoters, like we're all in this together. So in like looking at the solutions and actually seeing what needs to happen to be able to scale them up, like we really need to put some, continue to put some thought into that and to collaborate. That's the only way that we're going to get there.
Thank you. Karina, how can we work with the UN?
Well, absolutely invite all of you to get engaged with UN climate change. And we want to hear from you how we can also support the work that you're doing by bringing together all these different parties to the table. And I would encourage you, to be open about the challenges that you're facing when you're talking with one another, because I think there's a lot of answers, in these spaces from people who've tried it and had troubles but figured something out. So to really be vulnerable in sharing that.
Eric?
I mean, Vicky stole mine. I was going to mention collaboration, but because it really is necessary, especially among our large organizations, and we like cheer each other on, know each other really well across Live Nation and AEG. But I think I would love to see more of our work move from sort of back of house to front of house, right? We have so many artists and partners that are interested in sustainability, and it's growing and growing. And I mean, I'd love to see more of that energy that comes from our artists sort of in the meetings and on the Zooms at back of house happen on stage, right? We know that they're the biggest megaphones and influencers in our space, so that would be my desire of what I'd like to see.
Thank you. So thank you to ILMC for hosting this session this year, and huge round of applause for this lovely panel. Well done.